Soohwa uses the back door when he returns to the cafe, and only because, for some reason, he feels embarrassed for the scene he caused previously. Nevertheless, he had his priorities straight and wondered about Yohan's whereabouts. Suddenly, the super-stressed Ji-yoon appears and welcomes him back. Seeing the unusual appearance of his thug-next-door co-worker, Soohwa tries to back away from him, only for Ji-yoon to pat his shoulder and suddenly apologize. A very un-Ji-yoon-like gesture, scaring Soohwa even more. Instead of assuring Soohwa, however, Ji-yoon just started his monologue about how it doesn't really matter what others think when they see a couple doing PDA. In fact, the problem lies with Ji-yoon being narrow-minded and stepping out of bounds when it comes to Yohan and Soohwa's relationship. Geez, there goes the representative of the singles. Anyways, despite Ji-yoon's words meant to show his atonement for causing Soohwa to throw a tantrum to Soohwa, suddenly, it just looks like Ji-yoon is having a delirium after he got a fatal disease. This isn't really the case, but Ji-yoon agrees that having one is fitting in exchange for what he has done. Just what kind of scolding did Yohan do to him that he's acting like this? Shesh. Changing the topic, Ji-yoon tells Soohwa that he should head upstairs since Yohan is there and that he'll run the cafe by himself for the day. He even wishes Soohwa luck, which makes Soohwa wonder what for. It turns out that the luck was needed due to Yohan's foul mood. Even though Yohan hasn't said or done anything yet, just the atmosphere he's exuding is enough to make Soohwa feel more guilty than he already does. Soohwa tries to lighten the mood by showing Yohan the gift he bought. Before Soohwa could even give it to him, however, Yohan snatches it away from his hands and instead pulls him in the direction of their bed. Before Soohwa knew it, he was already lying on the bed with a very upset Yohan leaning over him. Yohan warns Soohwa that he's currently pissed, and because of that, he might get rougher than usual. Oh, wow, right off the bat. And, of course, Soohwa's reaction to this is to confirm they're going to do it now. Yohan then adds that he won't stop even if Soohwa tells him to. And what is the younger man's response to this? He says that he won't stop Yohan at all while blushing. Yohan's frustration and longing for Soohwa is clearly what fuels his boldness, seeing as he wants to do it even though it's clearly still 5 in the afternoon. Soohwa doesn't look like he minds and even calmly asks to be allowed to take a shower first, making Yohan wonder why Soohwa's not worried at all about what he might do to him. In Soohwa's defense, whatever it is that Yohan has in store for him, Soohwa is confident that he won't get overboard. Plus, he deserves whatever punishment it is since it's true that Soohwa was indeed at fault. It's just that he wasn't expecting his punishment to be executed this way. So can this still be considered a punishment if the one being punished looks eager? Nevertheless, Soohwa welcomes it and tells Yohan that he can do whatever he wants with him. To be more specific, his body. Yohan is moved by this declaration, although he once again warns Soohwa that even if he regrets those claims later on, Yohan still won't stop. Not long after, Soohwa finds his hands bound by handcuffs on his back, with his buns being prepared by Yohan's fingers. Not only that, but Soohwa's piston is also being restrained by a red ribbon. It's such a rough play that they had not done before, making Soohwa wonder where Yohan could have learned to do these kinds of stuff. Still, it makes Soohwa feel so good that even when Yohan fully plants himself inside his black hole, Soohwa doesn't feel any pain. And as if unsatisfied yet, Yohan turns Soohwa over while he's still inside, so that they are now facing each other and continue with the rodeo. That is when Soohwa starts to beg for Yohan to untie the ribbon because he wants to let it out. But, of course, Yohan refuses to do so. Yohan points out that Soohwa can let it out even if he's restrained, because he'll only untie it once he himself is done. After all, didn't Yohan say that whatever Soohwa says, he won't stop? It's already dark outside when the red ribbon is undone, the cuffs are off, and Soohwa is left trembling. Even then, he still manages to flirt with Yohan, and Yohan has no choice but to respond in kind, resulting in them to start making out. It feels like a perfect culmination to the punishment session that once Yohan makes the trembling Soohwa straddle him, he asks Yohan if he's now appeased. Even though it's obvious that he already is, Yohan had the audacity to be vague. Then again, it doesn't really matter since Soohwa draws the line, declaring that enough is enough. Yohan didn't push it, although he also didn't hide his disappointment for being unable to continue. As Soohwa tries to console Yohan, he suddenly remembers the present he had prepared for him. He's so excited about it that he thoughtlessly tries to get off the bed to get it for Yohan, only for Soohwa to almost fall straight on his face if it weren't for Yohan catching him just in time. As Yohan obliged himself to get it instead, Soohwa tries to massage his legs after realizing how his legs and lower back had become numb. I mean, what did you expect after all those exercises you did until the sun went down? Not long after, Yohan returns to the bed with the paper bag of Soohwa's gift. Yohan wonders for the reason behind the gift as Soohwa excitedly encourages him to open it. And Ada. Inside is a box with a couple's rings inside. Blushing furiously, Soohwa explains that they weren't that expensive and puts on his as he asks Yohan if he likes them. Yohan likes it, of course, and blushes himself as he says that. However, whether Yohan likes it or not isn't actually the problem. Soohwa offers to put on Yohan's ring, to which the older man eagerly agrees, only for them to realize shortly that the rings don't fit at all. Realizing that he messed up big time, Soohwa promises to return to the shop the next day to exchange it for the right size. But Yohan, being the ideal gentle teddy bear that he is, says that it doesn't really matter and the one he has now is good enough. In fact, he looks like it's the most precious thing in the world to him. Yohan looks so happy about it that Soohwa promises him that next time, he'll properly measure Yohan's ring size and buy a more expensive one. And with that, the two of them have finally made up. It's raining heavily outside when the now recovered Ji-yoon arrives inside Yohan's house. As Yohan requested, he had brought lunch for the unwell Soohwa, who is now on his stomach on top of the bed. Soohwa attempts to feel ungrateful and sarcastic about the gesture but quickly takes it back when Ji-yoon bares his fangs. Just as much because the porridge that Ji-yoon brought tasted great and expensive, as what I'd expected from our young master. As Ji-yoon watches Soohwa eat, he comments how he and Yohan easily make up while he spends all day getting scolded by Yohan. As confirmation, Soohwa eagerly shows off the ring he got them. I bet Ji-yoon wouldn't let him off if he knew how Soohwa messed up Yohan's size. Heh. Anyways, Ji-yoon asks Soohwa if he's not going to school. With how the weather is, it seems like classes were canceled anyway, so he'll just submit a doctor's notice in the next lecture. That said, Ji-yoon wonders if there's a need for him to take Soohwa to the hospital and asks when Yohan is coming back. Since they were already on the topic, Soohwa cautiously tells Ji-yoon how he had met Bi-young the day before. The stunned Ji-yoon was so shocked he started panicking, especially when Soohwa explained that it was because of this that Yohan had gone to Ji-yoon's mother today. Soohwa assures Ji-yoon that Yohan is fine. In fact, earlier that day, he tried stopping Yohan from going. But Yohan explains that there's nothing to worry about since he's not going there to fight. This doesn't really convince Soohwa, since he still thinks of the chairwoman as scary. But Yohan assures him that she isn't like that at all, nor is she a bad person, and that she's not someone who would break her promise, nor would she do anything to put them in danger. Although it's true that she doesn't interfere so much with Bi-young's affairs, she would have definitely come to warn them if he really is back, which she didn't do this time, and that's what's bothering Yohan. So he's just going to clear things out with the chairwoman. Back to the present, Soohwa explains that it's because of Yohan's assurance that he didn't immediately tell Ji-yoon about it. Although Ji-yoon somehow let out a sigh of relief, he couldn't help but observe how Yohan had become cleverer ever since meeting Soohwa, which, to Soohwa, doesn't sound like a compliment at all. Moving on, Ji-yoon asks Soohwa if he was with Ji-hae yesterday, to which Soohwa innocently confirms, and adding the fact that Bi-young had also seen Ji-yoon's apple of the eye. What's more, is that the tall guy who Ji-yoon was making out with at one time in an alley was also there. That fact made Ji-yoon's blood go cold, especially after Soohwa explained how it was strange that the guy asked Ji-hae for directions. After all, according to Bi-young, it was Mr. Tall Guy who told Bi-young to meet him there. Therefore, the guy himself chose the meetup place, and yet he didn't even meet up with Bi-young, and instead asked for directions from someone else. In fact, it made Soohwa wonder what the guy's connection is to Bi-young in the first place. That said, Soohwa cautiously asks Ji-yoon if he's not actually cheating on Ji-hae with Mr. Tall Guy since Ji-yoon did claim to like Ji-hae. Instead of answering, however, Ji-yoon just cursed, startling Soohwa, so that he immediately took back his accusing words. Ji-yoon menacingly springs up and makes it clear to Soohwa once again that there isn't really anything between him and Mr. Tall Guy, and there's no way for him to be cheating with the dude whatsoever. Without another word, Ji-yoon suddenly turns to leave. When Soohwa asks him where he's going, Ji-yoon declares that he's going to bury the guy. Ji-yoon had a murderous expression on that despite not feeling so good. Soohwa managed to get up from the bed as he attempted to talk Ji-yoon out of committing a crime, but Ji-yoon dismisses his concerns and just tells Soohwa to take care of himself and to go to a proctology clinic if he must. Heh, Of course, there's no way Soohwa will do that. And it's obvious that it's just Ji-yoon's attempt to get him off his back. But it didn't really work since Soohwa is fully intent on getting Ji-yoon's word that he didn't really mean what he just said about burying someone. Ji-yoon, however, didn't say anything anymore and just left the place, leaving Soohwa to realize how times like this are when he can clearly see the similarities between Ji-yoon and Bi-young. The rain was still heavily pouring outside when Ji-yoon wasted no time in calling the object of his murderous intent and telling him to come to see him immediately. Ji-yoon is waiting right outside a building for Mr. Sonamwoo, who arrived not long after in a black car. He looked like he already knew why he was summoned even though Ji-yoon didn't say anything and just told him to get in, promising to give him what he loves. Moving on, Ji-yoon and Mr. Numwoo are soaking under the rain, presumably in the backyard of Ji-yoon's place. Ji-yoon tells off Mr. Numwoo, who is now on his knees, or not backing off even though Ji-yoon was clear about it. Even though Ji-yoon is clearly very upset with him, Mr. Numwoo is flushing, almost like welcoming the hostility directed towards him. We now go back to the time when Bi-young had just left the country. Mr. Numwoo reports this news to Ji-yoon and assures him that Bi-young won't be coming back unless there's a special reason to do so. The chairwoman even gave the order for it. Taking the chairwoman's order as definite assurance, Ji-yoon tells Mr. Numwoo that their contract is now over. Apparently, Mr. Numwoo did not expect this at all, because he was stunned at Gi-yoon's words. Mr. Numwoo then tries to change Gi-yoon's mind, pointing out that Bi-young might suddenly show up like he did previously, and there's no telling what he'd do then. But Ji-yoon is resolute, especially since Yohan himself said that he's fine, and Bi-young now knows better than to try and provoke Yohan again. So, really, this time, the relationship between Ji-yoon and Mr. Numwoo, whatever it is really over. Mr. Numwoo had no choice but to agree at that time, but deep inside, he still couldn't accept that everything would end just like that between them. Back to the present, Ji-yoon is currently interrogating Mr. Numwoo about his scheme in bringing Bi-young back to the country. Ji-yoon looks like he's really about to beat Mr. Numwoo up, but instead of feeling scared, he looks like he's enjoying it even and is blushing still. Ji-yoon suddenly kicks Mr. Numwoo so that now he's lying on the ground. His menacing demeanor doesn't have the desired effect on Mr. Numwoo, who even has the audacity to push more of Ji-yoon's buttons. Mr. Numwoo asks Ji-yoon what he's so scared of. After all, Ji-yoon already knows that even though Bi-young really does return, it's not like he'll make a move against Ji-hae. And yet, he still demanded that Mr. Numwoo protect Ji-hae, or more like surveillance under the guise of protection. Really, since Ji-yoon made him report every single thing about Ji-hae like a stalker. Ji-yoon didn't deny this, but in his defense, he only did so because even though Bi-young wouldn't directly attack Ji-hae, there's still that chance that he'll get hurt because of Bi-young, just like what happened to Yohan. For Ji-yoon, what he did is justified, and Mr. Numwoo had no right to question him for it, especially since, in return, he put up with all of his demands. Ji-yoon kissed him and got angry with him. He did all those things even though he didn't like it. In fact, right at this moment, Ji-yoon is genuinely angry at him, and he's sure that Mr. Numwoo is having the time of his life. After all, in Ji-yoon's eyes, Mr. Numwoo is a perv betard who's really happy that Ji-yoon looks so much like the chairwoman that he loves. Going back to the moment when Ji-yoon is still confronting Mr. Numwoo about the incident that happened the day before. Ji-yoon accuses the older man of doing it on purpose, who tries to deny it at first. But Ji-yoon isn't one to back down and starts spelling it out. Since Mr. Numwoo isn't sloppy, everything went as planned. He targeted Ji-hae while he was with Soohwa. And since there's no way that Ji-hae would ever tell Ji-yoon what had happened, Soohwa will do it on his behalf without missing out on any details. In that way, Ji-yoon will get angry and call him. Well, Mr. Numwoo didn't deny any of it. Everything went as Ji-yoon had explained, which just made Ji-yoon get more agitated. He asks Mr. Numwoo what he has to do so he'll stop with his craziness. But instead of answering, Mr. Numwoo just reminds Ji-yoon how all of this started because of Ji-yoon himself. Going back to a few years ago, Mr. Numwoo went to meet Ji-yoon late at night in the company office. It seems that it was Ji-yoon who had called him there. So Mr. Numwoo asks him what he wanted to talk about that it couldn't wait in the morning. Ji-yoon is still docile then and tells Mr. Numwoo that it isn't that serious, and that he just needs his help. When Mr. Numwoo asks him about it, Ji-yoon explains that he's just an average guy with a lot of money. He didn't really have anyone in a position who had his back. In fact, even if he does inherit shares in the company, it's not like he really is going to receive anything. Still, it's not like Ji-yoon resents it. He had long accepted this inevitable fate since he was a kid, He didn't even want any of it in the first place. The point is that Ji-yoon is someone who can't do anything to protect himself or the people around him. Ji-yoon points out the incident between his precious friend and Bi-young, and Mr. Numwoo is quick to conclude that executing revenge is what he's asking for. But that isn't it. Ji-yoon explains that there is someone special he holds dear, and he wants Mr. Numwoo to keep an eye on him so that he doesn't cross paths with Bi-young, secretly protect him, and inform Ji-yoon if anything happens. Mr. Numwoo found it ridiculous at first and even tried to dismiss it. After all, he claims to have no time nor reason to grant such a request. Instead, Mr. Numwoo wonders why Ji-yoon would ask him of all people for something like that. Ji-yoon then explains that it's because he knows Bi-young well, and Mr. Numwoo is someone who can get close to him without being suspicious, will not get caught by the chairwoman, and can report to Ji-yoon with no problems at all. Ji-yoon is also very confident that Mr. Numwoo won't ever betray him either. When the older man asks him why he would think that, Ji-yoon reveals his trump card. The young master blackmails Mr. Numwoo regarding the fact that he is, in fact, in love with the chairwoman, and although he tries to deny it, Ji-yoon pushes through. Ji-yoon points out how Mr. Numwoo looks at the chairwoman, just like how he looks at his special person, although it's more like the older man reveres her like some sort of god. Anyway, it isn't really Ji-yoon's business. What matters is that he's using it to blackmail Mr. Numwoo to do his bidding. Well, it didn't take long for Mr. Numwoo to make up his mind and eventually gave in, much to Ji-yoon's delight. But then suddenly, Mr. Numwoo reaches out for Ji-yoon's face, making him flinch. Mr. Numwoo affirms the deal, but in return, he wants Ji-yoon to treat him with disrespect. Well, I'm sure we know someone or two who's into this kind of thing. I only know mine in the BL world, though. Mr. Numwoo wants Ji-yoon to address him as, "Hey, you are simply dude." He wants the younger man to not show any respect to him and to take his anger out on him if he must. This time, it's Ji-yoon's turn to be taken aback. But see, Mr. Numwoo is just acting based on his feelings as well. He tells Ji-yoon how he looks like the chairwoman. In fact, Ji-yoon resembles her so much. I swear, if it weren't for the art style, this scene would have been sexier and messier. Anyways, back to the present. Ji-yoon is stunned after realizing how everything did indeed start because of him and even looks like he had punched Mr. Numwoo for pointing it out. Despite everything, when Ji-yoon looks like he's not going to move despite the continued heavy downpour, Mr. Numwoo still worries about his well-being and urges Ji-yoon to take shelter before he gets sick. Shortly after, Ji-yoon is inside the safety of his home, watching the continued heavy downpour outside. Mr. Numwoo is not far behind him, also trying to dry himself. Ji-yoon addresses the older man, saying how he has no idea at all what's going on in his mind for wanting their arrangements to continue. After all, it's not like he likes Ji-yoon or wants to sleep with him. Ji-yoon feels so frustrated that he mindlessly suggests Mr. Numwoo to ask the chairwoman to participate in his hobbies, but that didn't go well at all. Mr. Numwoo was glaring murderously at Ji-yoon, declaring that there was no way he'd ever let the chairwoman do something so dirty. I feel insulted on Ji-yoon's behalf, but let's face it, that's still hot. Anyway, Ji even takes it back and tells Mr. Numwoo to leave if his hair's all dry now. Aha. So even the thug next door is no match for a wolf in sheep's clothing. Before completely dismissing the older man, however, Ji-yoon gives in and reinstates their arrangements but with some changes. In return for Ji-yoon to continue doing as Mr. Numwoo wants, the older man would stay away from Ji-hae. Mr. Numwoo gratefully smiles at Ji-yoon only for the young master to respond as the script requires. Just in time, Mr. Numwoo noticed his phone vibrate and was somehow surprised to see who it was. In a different area and with a different pair, although under the same weather, we see Yohan just about to leave the subway station. He is surprised to see Soohwa happily waiting for him. Yohan immediately comes to his side, reprimanding Soohwa for not staying at home, and asks him if he's feeling better. Soohwa says that he does since he's in bed all day and he only came because he's worried. Soohwa asks Yohan about the talk he had with the chairwoman, and Yohan explains that she didn't know about Bi-young being back, which means that Bi-young's presence isn't really something related to them, so they don't have to worry about it. Nevertheless, Yohan still looks like something is bothering him. In the chairwoman's office, we see her just getting off a phone call with Mr. Numwoo and commenting how he's been doing something interesting behind her back. Looks like someone's getting a beating. Soohwa and Ji-hae are concentrating on studying while Ji-yoon and Yohan just keep staring at them. Ji-hae noticed it and eventually found the urge to inquire about it, but Soohwa just tells him to ignore them, since it's just the two being smitten with their bios. Not long after, Soohwa calls for a break. As they did, Ji-hye comments how he's glad that they're having their exams in the same week, since English literature is a required course in their department. This makes Soohwa wonder as to why, when Ji-hye's major is, in fact, architecture. College. Am I right? Heh. On a different note, Ji-hye innocently asks Soohwa about himself, wondering if Soohwa living with Yohan gets in the way of his studies, like at night. Being the perv that he is, Soohwa took the question in the wrong way. Heh. But really, it's just that Ji-hye is innocently curious about the change in Soohwa's sleeping pattern and whatnot, since sometimes he has to stay up super late to study. Recovering from his self-inflicted embarrassment, Soohwa denies anything getting in the way of his studies. In fact, nothing getting in the way actually became the biggest problem. Going back to 2 weeks prior, Yohan had been tending to his garden when Soohwa suddenly declared that starting the following week, he's going to have to focus on studying because of his exams. Yohan didn't make any fuss about it. In fact, he promises not to bother Soohwa like he did the day prior, and that he won't make any move on him until Soohwa is done with his exams. At that time, Soohwa was glad to hear Yohan's words, only he didn't anticipate to what extent Yohan would go to keep it. In the days that followed, Yohan had been very accommodating and supportive of Soohwa as he studied and made sure not to get in his way. At all, he's grateful and all, but it frustrated Soohwa a lot too, that he couldn't help but feel like it's Yohan's way of getting back at him when he previously denied Yohan of sleeping with him because of his unorganized feelings. Anyways, Ji-hye cuts short their study session since he still has to make a delivery. Soohwa compliments him for keeping it up and trying to study and work at the same time, but it isn't really a burden to Ji-hye in the least. Just as Ji-hye bids his goodbyes to Ji-yoon and Yohan, Soohwa accidentally or not makes eye contact with Yohan. Noticing this, Yohan dutifully sends his adjective to Soohwa, making him blush. Later that night, Soohwa turns off a light as he tells Yohan to sleep. He then continues studying under the desk lamp that Yohan had given him. As Soohwa flips on his notes, he glances at the sleeping Yohan and reflects on the fact that it has been about 2 weeks since the two of them did the rodeo. In fact, Yohan didn't even touch him since he thought that it would bother Soohwa in some way. Soohwa involuntarily flinches when he hears Yohan mumble in his sleep. He's obviously frustrated as he closes his notebook and walks towards the sleeping Yohan. The only thing on his mind is his desire to want to sleep with a man. He had it coming. Then again, we can only imagine how it is for Yohan himself. Heh. Despite wanting to act on his impulses, it's not like Soohwa can just do so with someone who's sleeping. Kinky, but it's the wrong BL. Anyways, Soohwa went to the bathroom and decided to just do it by himself. Although it's been a while since he had done so, he still wonders why it doesn't seem like he's feeling good. Or if it does, it isn't enough at all. Only when he starts touching his black hole did he feel it. Then again, he's still unable to reach his sweet spot, making him frustrated yet again. Right at that moment, Yohan wakes up after feeling thirsty and wonders where Soohwa is when he doesn't see him, but then notices the light coming from inside the bathroom. Meanwhile, inside the bathroom, Soohwa is on his knees on the bathroom floor, trying all the positions he can do by himself to get off, but ultimately failing. He's in the middle of such a struggle when Yohan knocks on the door, asking if something's wrong since Soohwa has been inside a while. Yohan's knock seems to be an answered prayer for Soohwa. And so, instead of a verbal answer, Soohwa opens the bathroom door and pulls Yohan inside. Soohwa then pushes Yohan against the wall and asks to borrow his hand, although Yohan has no idea, since Soohwa had his head down that Yohan couldn't read his lips. Soohwa doesn't try to explain further and just grabs Yohan's hand towards his black hole, making poor Yohan fluster after realizing that Soohwa's lower half is actually exposed. Again, Soohwa doesn't try to explain himself and just urges Yohan to give him relief. With just one thrust of Yohan's fingers, Soohwa is freed of his frustration. Soohwa is trembling as he slumps on the bathroom floor once again, relishing the relief only to notice little Yohan starting to get alert. Soohwa shamelessly points this out and nozzles on it, all the while claiming that this leaves them with no choice anymore. Although Yohan still tries his best to maintain self-control, it's a different story when Soohwa himself asks for it. After all, a man is still a man. Yohan and Soohwa did the deed in the bathroom to the point that Soohwa lost all his strength. Even then, he still urges Yohan to do it again. It's not like Yohan doesn't want to, but he at least takes into consideration the exam that Soohwa is supposed to be preparing for. Soohwa insists, however, and even makes use of Yohan's weakness against him using sign language. Very clever, indeed. And so, Yohan gives in. and the two of them do it once more. Doing it in a different position this time, Yohan had Soohwa against the wall while carrying him and playing with his nip-nops simultaneously, giving a new light to the word multitasking. Anyway, perhaps it was because they didn't do it for weeks, but Soohwa is once again quick to reach his climax. Even then, Soohwa still won't let go of Yohan. The older man once again asks Soohwa if they should stop now, but Soohwa still won't, even though he's clearly trembling and at his limits, all because doing it with Yohan feels great. Soohwa just doesn't want to let go of Yohan's junior that he even suggests taking a shower while Yohan is still inside him. Who knew abstaining for 2 weeks could make someone lose his mind? The next day, Soohwa is in his classroom gathering his stuff when Ha-young and Hae-young come to his seat, asking how he did in the exam because the two of them obviously aren't at all confident. Soohwa can't exactly say he shares the same sentiments, making the two resent him for being able to do great. Ha-young asks her Sunbae how he managed to do so, but all Soohwa says is it's all thanks to the power of love. Cringy much. Anyway, all that cringy response did is get Soohwa's Hubaes to resent him more. Meanwhile, in the cafe, Yohan is trying to alleviate the pain in his back. Ji-yoon noticed this and asked about it. Yohan explained that it was because he had fallen in the bathroom, although he couldn't exactly explain why. But Ji-yoon is quick to guess as to why exactly and regrets asking in the first place. That's to say, it seems like Soohwa managed to convince Yohan to take a shower while they're still connected, which resulted in Yohan slipping on the bathroom floor. And here we thought the older you get, the wiser you become. Returning to the night when Mr. Numwoo got a call from the chairwoman, he soon went to the company building. Once inside, he sees a chill Hee-yoon-ho with a lollipop in his mouth, waiting for him, since it seems like the two of them were actually summoned together this time. Without another word, Mr. Numwoo urges Hee-yoon-ho to the elevator. While the two of them wait for the elevator to arrive, Hee-yoon-ho just can't keep his mouth shut and asks Mr. Numwoo if something is wrong between him and the chairwoman, since Hee-yoon-ho senses an uncomfortable vibe between them, which may have resulted from Mr. Numwoo making a mistake. Then again, he rarely makes a mistake, so whatever it is, the chairwoman won't make a big deal out of it. Despite not getting any response from his audience, Hee-yoon-ho continued to chatter by himself. He tells Mr. Numwoo about how when he went on a long business trip, he made a huge mistake, resulting in the chairwoman calling him just like she did this time. And as punishment, she made him volunteer at the daycare center. Mr. Numwoo comments on how it's such a light punishment for having made a huge mistake, and Hee-yoon-ho agrees. But he also points out how the volunteer work is tougher than it seems. He adds that even though taking care of children is a rewarding task, it is by no means an easy one, although it's still a plus that the kids are cute. Anyways, Hee-yoon-ho's point is that whatever Mr. Numwoo did, the chairwoman would go easy on him, just as she did on Hee-yoon-ho. After all, Hee-yoon-ho is pretty sure what he did is way worse than whatever Mr. Numwoo could have done. Well, I'm not too sure about that. Not long after, Mr. Numwoo paused just when he was about to knock on the chairwoman's office door and whispered at Hee-yoon-ho about the lollipop that was still in his mouth. Hee-yoon-ho then panics as he tries to finish the candy just as Mr. Numwoo knocks for real. As they enter, the chairwoman greets them, although she was expecting them to come much later. Being the sharp woman that she is, the chairwoman teases Hee-yoon-ho to wait for a couple of minutes to let him finish his candy. But of course, Hee-yoon-ho shakes his head no. Anyways, the chairwoman gets straight to the point, asking Mr. Numwoo if he's already aware of the fact of why she called the two of them, which Mr. Numwoo, in fact, knew. The chairwoman then adds that whenever one does something wrong, they should be punished. And although she would normally let such small things slide, she couldn't this time around. The chairwoman points out how she had sent Bi-young abroad for a reason, and yet Mr. Numwoo brings him back just like that. The worst part is that the victim found out about it, even though she had promised him herself that he wouldn't ever have to see Bi-young again. Mr. Numwoo had no other response to this but a short apology. With that exchange, Hee-yoon-ho realizes that the reason for them getting called there is related to Bi-young's sudden return. Hee-yoon-ho hopes in earnest that he didn't do anything wrong to warrant a punishment himself. The thing is, Hee-yoon-ho wasn't called to get punished. In fact, she just wants Hee-yoon-ho to take over Mr. Numwoo's position for the time being, which made Hee-yoon-ho flustered, unsure if he could, in fact, do it. But the chairwoman encourages him. Meanwhile, Mr. Numwoo is to take a little break like some sort of vacation, which means that Mr. Numwoo won't have to report to her and instead should just report to Hee-yoon-ho instead. That way, they won't be seeing each other for a while. As expected, this made Mr. Numwoo upset. Geez, looks like the chairwoman is already into Mr. Numwoo's kink even without him asking her to. Scary. Anyways, Yoon-ho was pleased with himself since, as he had anticipated, Mr. Numwoo didn't get a harsh punishment at all and was even getting a vacation of sorts. Although in exchange, it seems like Yoon-ho himself is the one taking in more responsibilities. To Yoon-ho's surprise, however, it seems like Mr. Numwoo is dissatisfied with his punishment and even asks for something else. But, of course, the chairwoman isn't about to just give in, insisting that the said punishment is perfect for Mr. Numwoo after what he did. As for until when, the chairwoman declares that it will be until he takes care of what he had done. And with that, the chairwoman politely dismisses the two of them from his office. Later on, after leaving her office, Yoon-ho tries to console Mr. Numwoo. Although, admittedly, he had no idea what all that was about. But Mr. Numwoo just brushes his concerns off and asks him to take care of the rest of his work for him, since he has something to do outside the office. Yoon-ho didn't want to. After all, it's almost time for them to get off from work. And so Mr. Numwoo just tells him to go home then and to call him anytime if something happens. Mr. Numwoo is so contradictory that in the end, Yoon-ho is in a dilemma about whether he's allowed to go home or not. Mr. Numwoo knows mind games well, after all. In a change of pace, we now visit and focus on another couple in the series. Ji-hae is in his class, contemplating whether he likes Ji-yoon or not. And obviously, it's a like as in romantically. Ji-hae remembers how Soohwa advised him to give it a chance, most probably because he already knew that he was talking about Gi-yoon, seeing as Soohwa didn't even ask who he was talking about in the first place. That said, Ji-hae wonders what Ji-yoon's qualities should he like. He then starts to list down the qualities that Ji-yoon has, like how handsome and kind he is, and how Ji-yoon would always come to see him first, or how he would always smile when he looks at Ji-hae. Although the most important would probably be the fact that Ji-yoon likes him. Ji-hae recalls the first time that he got to know about Ji-yoon. It was when he had just gotten into college that a friend of his shared rumors about Ji-yoon. About how this particular sunbae from the architecture department is super scary and has a permanent scowl on his face. He also swears a lot when he talks, but he also has a very handsome face, so he's able to sleep around and stuff. Ji-hae dismisses all those stuff. After all, they're all just rumors. But his friend insists that there could be some truth in it. After all, Ji-yoon is really famous. And just like how the song goes, where there's smoke, there's fire. The point is that Ji-hae's friend just wants him to be careful. Speaking of the devil, or as if due to some sort of fate, Ji-yoon shows himself from a distance, and that was Ji-hae's first time seeing Ji-yoon. And even though his friend claims that his face looks scary, Ji-hae doesn't find Ji-yoon scary at all. If any, he seems like he's been hurt. Anyway, Ji-hae didn't think much of it. After all, it's not like Ji-yoon has anything to do with him whatsoever. Or so he thought. Until one day, Ji-yoon starts approaching and talking to Ji-hae on his own. It was all because of the advice that Ji-hae gave Ji-yoon when he first spoke to him in front of the bar. Turns out the advice was followed and the problem was resolved. And as thanks, Ji-yoon wants to treat Ji-hae to a meal. At first, Ji-hae wonders if he really deserves thanks for just telling the truth at that time. Nevertheless, that was the start of their friendship. Back then, Ji-hae had no idea that Ji-yoon could smile as brightly as he did. Back to the present. Ji-hae is about to leave when someone calls him over. It was one of his classmates who won the write reports with him. Unfortunately, or not, Ji-hae's already got plans, not to mention he's already done writing his reports. Although disappointed, the classmate bid him farewell, and they went their separate ways. See, Ji-hae did have plans to meet up with Ji-yoon, and he's looking forward to it as well. They were supposed to watch a movie, although the theater was pretty empty when Ji-hae got there. Ji-yoon isn't there either, which makes Ji-hae curious since his sunbae usually arrives before him. He was trying to call Ji-yoon on his phone when Ji-hae suddenly heard his sunbae's voice from the parking lot. It seems like Ji-yoon is talking to someone he doesn't want to and is trying to send away. Intrigued, Ji-hae went towards the parking lot and came upon Ji-hae talking to the guy who had asked him for directions the other day. Seeing as Ji-yoon looked agitated, Ji-hae was just about to make himself known, if only so he could assist him in some way. But before he can do so, Ji-hae sees the guy suddenly kiss Ji-yoon on the lips. Oh, wow. This is too much of a coincidence, although it really is. Mr. Numwoo is really out of it once the chairwoman is involved. Huh. Going back a couple of minutes before the coincidence from the previous chapter, Ki-yoon just arrived at the parking lot and is 20 minutes early for his appointment with Ji-hae, which is just perfect. Ji-yoon was thinking of ordering some hot drinks since the weather is a bit chilly while waiting for Ji-hae. And that was when Mr. Numwoo suddenly appeared out of the blue, almost giving Ji-yoon a heart attack. Ji-yoon is in the middle of inspecting himself for being wiretapped when Mr. Numwoo suddenly says that he has something to tell him. For some reason, Ji-yoon had a feeling it was something troublesome, so he tried to send Mr. Numwoo away. After all, he's supposed to be going on a date with Ji-hae, but the older man insisted, saying that it was something urgent and even pointing out that Ji-yoon was actually the only one who thought it was a date. Geez, Mr. Numwoo. Of course, pissing someone off is the best way to ask for a favor from them. Anyways, Ji-yoon once again shoos the older man away, but Mr. Numwoo just won't take no for an answer. And so, Ji-yoon gives in and agrees to give Mr. Numwoo 5 minutes of his time. After a brief explanation, Ji-yoon came to understand that now the chairwoman declared to not even give Mr. Numwoo a glance until he fixed what he had done. This also meant that the chairwoman was, in fact, aware of everything that he'd been doing behind her back. Anyways, from Ji-yoon's perspective, this is actually good news, and easily agreed to forget everything that had transpired between them. After all, ending things would mean that Ji-yoon could freely see Ji-hae and not meet with Mr. Numwoo anymore. But for some reason, Mr. Numwoo disagrees, since according to him, he still didn't get a proper ending, and insists that the end should be clean and definite. This confuses Ji-yoon. After all, it's obvious that they both want this arrangement to end, so what's more left to do? Mr. Numwoo then explains that there's one last thing that needs to be done before they can call it a clean ending. See, the last time that they saw each other, Mr. Numwoo only got punished. He did not receive the reward that he was supposed to receive after the punishment, and that reward is supposed to be none other than a kiss. Having said that, of course, Ji-yoon is going to get agitated, especially since Mr. Numwoo demanded it while they were out in public where someone could see them. Although Ji-yoon did agree to do it, but only when they're back at home later. Mr. Numwoo, though, is in a hurry and does it against Ji-yoon's will, earning him a smack on the chin. Ji-yoon let out a sigh of relief when he didn't see anyone by the parking lot entrance, especially Ji-hae. Ahem. Yeah, sure. Anyways, with that, it's really the end between Ji-yoon and Mr. Numwoo. The older man even promised not to bother Ji-yoon anymore with his favors and to take care of everything regarding Bi-young. Moving on, Ji-yoon left the parking lot and saw Ji-hae waiting for him right outside the theater place. Ji-hae acted normal as he greeted him and even throughout the movie date, or so he thought. When it's about time to head home, it's already dark outside. Ji-yoon offered to give Ji-hae a ride home and also asked if he was free tomorrow so he could see him again. With an innocent smile on his face, Ji-hae said no. Ji-yoon didn't think much of it and asked for other days to meet, but Ji-hae declined all of them. Now wearing a serious expression, Ji-hae tells Ji-yoon that they can't meet even next week or the week after that, because Ji-hae isn't going to see Ji-yoon ever again. Of course, Ji-yoon is confused about where this is all coming from, but all Ji-hae does is thank Ji-yoon for everything he's done for him as if it really is the last time that they're going to see each other. It's late at night and Mr. Numwoo is still in the office. He's talking to someone on the phone, sounding as if he's just about done finalizing some stuff. After he gets off the phone, Hee-yoon-ho gets his attention and asks if he's done with his phone call now. Well, duh. Mr. Numwoo then asks Hee-yoon-ho why he's still in the office, which just pisses Hee-yoon-ho off. After all, wasn't Mr. Numwoo the one who asked him to finish up some stuff for him? Anyways, Hee-yoon-ho then asks Mr. Numwoo if he's already taken care of things on his end. Mr. Numwoo affirms, saying that Bi-young will be leaving the country again by next week. This means that Mr. Numwoo would be reinstated to his original position by then as well. Hee-yoon-ho suggests that Mr. Numwoo report this to the chairwoman himself, although instead of answering, he's just told to go home. Hee-yoon-ho was just about to head out when he suddenly noticed someone walking in their direction. Frantic, Hee-yoon-ho immediately let Mr. Numwoo know. Turns out it was Ji-yoon, who looked quite upset for some reason. When asked why he's there, Ji-yoon explains that Ji-hae saw them and that he knows everything. Hee-yoon-ho, of course, doesn't really know what's going on. Although there's one thing he's sure of, with the reaction that Mr. Numwoo had after hearing Ji-yoon's words, Hee-yoon-ho knows that it meant he'd be working late next week as well. Going back to the conversation between Ji-yoon and Ji-hae earlier that night, Ji-hae explains that he won't be seeing Ji-yoon anymore since it would be unfair to the other person if he did. Ji-hae added that he saw Ji-yoon and the guy in the parking lot. Realizing what just happened, Ji-yoon tries to explain himself, but Ji-hae cuts him off. The younger man tells him that it's all right and that he's thankful he and Ji-yoon are not in a relationship. that he's glad he found out about it before they could have one. Ji-hye then bids his sunbae goodbye, saying that he's going to go home himself and that he wants to be alone. Back to the present. The older men had Ji-yoon take a seat, and Hee-yoon-ho even tried to offer him a cup of tea. But suddenly, Ji-yoon tearing up and crying, making Hee-yoon-ho panic once again. Ji-yoon then said that Ji-hye didn't want to see him again. He explains that even though Ji-hye doesn't feel the same way towards him, Ji-yoon is fine with just being able to be around him. But if that isn't even possible, then what is he supposed to do now? Already aware that he has caused this problem, Mr. Numwoo asks Hee-yoon-ho to take care of the documents he handed him earlier, after which he prepares to leave. When Hee-yoon-ho asked him what he was going to do, Mr. Numwoo briefly answered that he had some business outside of the office. Mr. Numwoo then pulls Ji-yoon up to go with him, leaving Hee-yoon-ho to do overtime on top of his overtime. Ji-yoon is wearing a bathrobe and fiddling his fingers when Ji-hye, who is also in a bathrobe and drying his hair, suddenly calls him. The younger man sat on the bed Ji-yoon was on and asked him what they were going to do now. Ji-yoon's eyes fell onto Ji-hye's exposed chest. The sunbae then blushes and grabs Ji-hye's hand, all the while thinking how he still can't believe how they got into this current situation, although he really welcomes it. Going back to a few days prior, Soohwa was sweeping in front of the cafe when Mr. Numwoo and a very upset Ji-yoon suddenly arrived together. Soohwa's immediate response was to accuse Ji-yoon of cheating on Ji-hye again, seeing as Ji-yoon and Mr. Numwoo are together now after he disappeared. Soohwa explained that because Ji-yoon disappeared, he had no choice but to cover for him. Since Ji-yoon is now here, they can just change shifts again. But then, Mr. Numwoo suddenly asks Soohwa for a favor. The older man explains that he will work on Soohwa's shifts in the cafe. In exchange, he wants Soohwa to listen to what he has to say, already having an idea of what was going on between him and Ji-yoon. Soohwa's immediate conclusion was that Mr. Numwoo wanted to ask him the same thing, that Soohwa almost punched the older man himself. Later on, Mr. Numwoo and Ji-yoon explained to Soohwa what had happened. Long story short, Ji-yoon and Mr. Numwoo screwed things up. So now, Ji-hye hates Ji-yoon's guts. They do know it was their fault and that they deserve it. They also tried to apologize. Mr. Numwoo went to Ji-hye's house that night to explain his relationship with Ji-yoon and to apologize, but Ji-hye completely shut him down, telling the older man that he had no interest in knowing what their relationship is and that he doesn't want to talk to someone he doesn't know either. As for Ji-yoon, he tried to approach and speak to Ji-hye again and again for days, but all he got from it was his hubei calling him a stalker. Obviously, the two of them really don't know how to go about fixing this. Even Soohwa could see it just from them telling him what they did. Anyways, now that he had an idea what had happened, Soohwa asked Mr. Numwoo what favor he wanted to ask of him. Although he also warns him that he won't force Ji-hye to forgive them since they did screw up, Mr. Numwoo is already aware of this. All he wants Soohwa to do is to ask Ji-hye to at least hear them out. But Ji-yoon stops him. Ji-yoon admits it was his fault and that they deserve what's happening. He then gets up to leave, declaring that he's going to go and apologize to Ji-hye again. When Mr. Numwoo tries to follow him, Ji-yoon tells him to stay and take his shift in the cafe instead. With traces of tears still in his eyes, Ji-yoon tells them he'll be back before finally leaving the cafe. Soohwa was taken aback. He couldn't believe that the almighty Ji-yoon actually cried. More so when Mr. Numwoo suddenly asks for his apron, fully intent on actually working in the cafe as instructed. Seeing how really messed up things had become, of course, Soohwa had no choice but to try and help solve things. And so, Soohwa takes out his phone and calls Ji-hye himself, and all of these transpired without the cafe's owner knowing anything. Ji-hye is in the classroom waiting when the door suddenly opens, revealing a panting Ji-yoon. Ji-hye welcomes him properly, saying his sunbae arrived earlier than he anticipated. This surprised Ji-yoon, after all the time Ji-hye spent not wanting to have anything to do with him. Ji-hye explains that he received a call from Soohwa, and so Ji-yoon asks if Soohwa told Ji-hye to meet with him. Although that isn't really it. Ji-hye said that Soohwa actually told him not to forgive Ji-yoon until he fully understood what happened, adding that although Soohwa genuinely wants for the two of them to make up, Ji-hye shouldn't also accept Ji-yoon's apology just because someone tells him to do so. If, after hearing Ji-yoon out, Ji-hye still decides to hate Ji-yoon, and that's too bad. Anyways, since it wasn't Soohwa who convinced Ji-hye to meet him, Ji-yoon wonders why he would want to then. Ji-hye explains that although Soohwa didn't tell him to meet Ji-yoon, he did ask him to give it a lot of thought, and so that's just what he'll do. Ji-hye slowly walks towards Ji-yoon and tells him that he doesn't want to hate his sunbae. Actually, Ji-hye really had no idea why Ji-yoon and Mr. Numwoo kissed, nor did he want to know. It's just that whenever Ji-hye comes across a situation like this, he tends to keep his distance until, eventually, their relationship ends. But that's the thing. Ji-hye doesn't want to end whatever it is that he has with Ji-yoon. Therefore, Ji-hye decided that he listened to Ji-yoon's excuses and believed them, whatever they may be. But, of course, Ji-yoon won't be one to give an excuse, especially towards Ji-hye. And so, Ji-yoon started to tell him everything, starting from what his little brother Bi-young did to Yohan. Ji-yoon explains that Bi-young hates him, and so Ji-yoon gets scared that Bi-young might do to Ji-hye what he did to Yohan. Ji-yoon still blames himself for why Yohan got hurt, and he's just scared that he might also be the reason that Ji-hye gets hurt. Ji-yoon also adds that the guy that Ji-hye saw the other day is someone that Ji-yoon blackmailed in order to protect Ji-hye, or, if we don't sugarcoat it, to keep an eye on Ji-hye. Ji-yoon emphasizes that he and Mr. Numwoo really just used each other, and the kiss was simply compensation and nothing more. And with that, Ji-yoon is finished with his piece. Although, it wasn't what Ji-hye asked, since he did say that he just wants Ji-yoon to make an excuse. But Ji-yoon knows that Ji-hye hates making excuses and the like since Ji-hye hates people lying to him. Plus, Ji-yoon had already done something that Ji-hye didn't like, so there was no way Ji-yoon would add another one. That said, Ji-hye admits that it really isn't what he had expected, and he also realized that it really is hard for him to hate Ji-yoon. Ji-hye admits that he contemplated a lot of what he had to do in order to reciprocate Ji-hye's feelings, but then one day he realized that the reason why it's taking him a long time to think about it is because he already likes Ji-yoon in the first place. That's why. Even though Ji-hye just heard how Ji-yoon had ordered someone to stalk him, Ji-hye is actually more angry that Ji-yoon kissed the guy. Ji-hye admits that he has never really liked anything or anyone in his life. He never wanted anything in particular or wanted something to be his. That's why he can't really be sure about his feelings. But one thing's for sure, Ji-hye wants to like Ji-yoon for real. Returning his confession, Ji-hye held Ji-yoon's hands as he told him that he thought he wants his sunbae. And since Ji-hye just said that he's still not sure what he likes about Ji-yoon, Ji-yoon started listing down the things that may convince Ji-hye, such as his looks and whatnot. After all, Ji-yoon is now given an opportunity to appeal for Ji-hye's affection. Therefore, even if it's just one thing, then Ji-yoon will cling unto it. Anyway, Ji-hye does think that Ji-yoon is handsome. That's not why he started liking his sunbae. Nor is his height or voice, not even money or personality. Since Ji-yoon is essentially only nice to Ji-hye, right, heh. Without anything more to list, Ji-yoon drops his final card, which is his body. Oh ho, interesting. But that's just me. Ji-hye was just about to shut Ji-yoon down, pointing out how Ji-yoon already said that he won't do anything that Ji-hye won't like, so how could he try and offer his body like that to try and seduce him? Just so we're all on the same page, you do understand Ji-yoon is talking about sleeping with Ji-hye, right? Because you see, Ji-yoon is serious about what he said and about his desperation to get Ji-hye to like him back. His determination seems to have touched Ji-hye because the Hubei agreed to do it in the end. He's willing to sleep with Ji-yoon if he thinks that it's going to be what it'll take to convince him. Ji-yoon tries to take it back, since he did say he doesn't want to do anything that Ji-hye is uncomfortable with, but Ji-hye is really all for it. After all, Ji-yoon is bearing his feelings to him. It's just right that Ji-hye do the same. Going back to the beginning of the previous chapter, when Ji-yoon grabs Ji-hye's hand. Ji-yoon is just about to kiss Ji-hye, but then he suddenly stops, making Ji-hye wonder why. And then Ji-yoon covers Ji-hye's eyes, saying that he needs to since he might feel bad about it. Later that night, Ji-yoon had Ji-hye in a comfortable position on the bed while he services him. And in the middle of it, Ji-hye asks Ji-yoon if he's going to be the bottom. Ji-yoon didn't immediately answer, although in the end he tells Ji-hye that it doesn't really matter whether Ji-hye is going to be the bottom or the top. What matters is that Ji-hye enjoys himself. Ji-yoon then declares that he won't go all the way today, since it's their first time. All the while, Ji-yoon promises to himself that he's going to do everything he can to make Ji-hye feel good. Ji-yoon continues to give Ji-hye a service, and Ji-yoon is glad that it doesn't seem like Ji-hye hates receiving his service. Ji-yoon is just taking a short break when he realizes that Ji-hye stopped covering his eyes and is actually looking at Ji-yoon as he did what he was doing. It made Ji-yoon panic and try to cover Ji-hye's eyes again. But Ji-hye assures him that there's no need for that. Ji-hye doesn't really mind. In fact, Ji-hye would rather have Ji-yoon show him more of it. Ji-yoon tries to insist on doing everything alone, but then Ji-hye suddenly slips his hand on Ji-yoon's sword as if to make a point. The sword that in Ji-hye's observation had also stood alert like his. Ji-hye tries to return the favor and make Ji-yoon feel good as well, but all he manages to do is hurt his sunbae after squeezing the sword beyond comfort. Ji-hye immediately apologized, of course. In his defense, it was his first time touching someone else's sword, so he forgot to control his strength. In return, Ji-hye offers to service Ji-yoon as well, as he did to him. And although Ji-yoon might have loved the idea in different circumstances, asking something like that for a newbie is definitely too much. Although honestly, Ji-yoon is just scared that an accident might happen if he lets Ji-hye do it. Anyways, Ji-hye believed Ji-yoon and instead just promised to be more gentle when using his hand this time. Ji-yoon tries to stop him at first, but after Ji-hye starts rubbing on Ji-yoon's sword, the sunbae starts feeling good and even asks Ji-hye to move his hand faster. That was when Ji-hye realized that Ji-yoon is actually holding back because Ji-hye is a newbie in this. Ji-yoon tries to deny this, but then Ji-hye just tells him to teach him everything instead and that Ji-yoon can do whatever he wants with him. Ji-hye is confident that he's a fast learner, so it'll be easy for him to catch on. Seeing as Ji-hye really is okay with how things are, Ji-yoon allowed himself to respond kindly to Ji-hye's offer and asked Ji-hye to turn around. Much later that evening, Ji-hye is now lying on his stomach while his bum-bums are in the air, and his black hole is being prepared by Ji-yoon. The sunbae explains that even if it hurts now, they have to do it to loosen Ji-hye up. Ji-hye claims that it doesn't hurt, although he did feel weird and good at the same time. As Ji-yoon continued on his mission, they came to a point where Ji-hye just straight out told Ji-yoon to impale his sword on his black hole. Ji-yoon, of course, complied and tells Ji-hye to relax as he slowly did as told. Once Ji-yoon had his full length inside, he asks Ji-hye if he can start moving. Not long after, Ji-yoon started moving and he feels amazing as he did. But then Ji-hye suddenly tightens up, which makes Ji-yoon reach his climax early. Ji-hye apologizes, knowing that he's partly to be blamed. But Ji-yoon dismisses it, and instead promises Ji-hye that next time, he'll make Ji-hye feel good, too. Given that Ji-hye gives him another chance to sleep with him, of course. Ji-hye then interrupts Ji-yoon by saying that when he agreed to sleep together, Ji-hye was serious. He tells his sunbae that the moment he decided to be with him, he also decided to commit to it. Therefore, Ji-yoon doesn't need to worry whether they can still do this or not. If anything, it's Ji-hye who needs to be making an effort in their relationship and not Ji-yoon. Ji-hye admits that his feelings for Ji-yoon only grew after doing it with him this time. Although Ji-hye also thinks that their relationship is progressing faster than it should be. Suddenly, Ji-yoon started crying. As Ji-yoon tries to calm him down, Ji-yoon promises to be good to Ji-hye, and that he really likes him. With them finally being official, Ji-yoon asks if he can kiss Ji-hye. The couple easily agrees, although Ji-yoon is still too shy and overwhelmed with emotions. Even though he's the one who wants to kiss Ji-hye, in the end, Ji-hye is the one who moves so they can actually kiss. I swear, Ji-yoon's worse than Yohan in cringiness. The next day, Ji-yoon is back working at the cafe, although right now, all he's doing is being in a daze and starts giggling by himself. And he's also doing it while sharing Soohwa's table, who is currently trying to study. Soohwa couldn't take it anymore and tries to call out Ji-yoon for trying to rub on his face just how happy he is. Thanks to his previous experience, whenever he tries to talk back to Ji-yoon, Soohwa prepares himself to get hit. Only Ji-yoon didn't. Instead, Ji-yoon just smiles at Soohwa happily as he tells him how Soohwa almost looks like an angel in his eyes, which makes Soohwa cringe. Okay, being in love really does make you go stupid. This one here is a perfect example. Anyway, the cafe entrance suddenly opens, revealing a very eager Hyun-ho. He goes straight to Soohwa and greets him, who in return asks Hyun-ho if he's there to eat lunch. As much as he wants to, unfortunately, that's not the reason why he's there. Hyun-ho explains that he's there looking for Mr. Numwoo, whose signature he urgently needs. And so Soohwa points Hyun-ho to the kitchen behind the counter. There Hyun-ho saw a scene he's never expected to see, which is Mr. Numwoo wearing an apron over his suit and cooking fried rice with ease. Soohwa then asks him if he can take Mr. Numwoo with him now, because you know he's grateful for the help. Mr. Numwoo's presence in the clinic is stressing Yohan out. Apparently, Mr. Numwoo's been idling there for so long that Soohwa wonders why the company still hadn't fired him. Then again, Yoon-ho explains that there's no way their company would ever fire him. Moving on, the very upset Yoon-ho calls out on Mr. Numwoo and asks him if he's planning on getting a job in the cafe. Yoon-ho also adds that the chairwoman wants Mr. Numwoo to return, asking why he still hadn't come back when the problems all seem to have been resolved. Just as Yoon-ho was thinking of trying to appeal to Mr. Numwoo to convince him more, turns out there wasn't a need for it. Mr. Numwoo immediately took off his apron and declared that he'd now returned to the company. He turns to Yohan to give his business card, and he apologizes for all the trouble he has caused. And without saying anything else, Yohan gives him a cafe coupon in return. Yoon-ho bids farewell, promising to return for lunch next time. After the two older men left, Soohwa heaved a sigh of relief. Yohan then asks if Soohwa wants him to fix him some lunch since they don't have customers at the moment. Soohwa then tells him that he can just have the food that Mr. Numwoo made since it'd be a waste just to throw it out. But then Yohan shyly tells him that he wants Soohwa to eat a food that Yohan made. Blushing at the clear gesture of affection, Soohwa pinches Yohan's nose and pulls him for a kiss. Soohwa reprimands him for suddenly getting jealous again, although he finds it cute at the same time. Yohan didn't say anything and instead just kisses Soohwa back. After a short makeout session, Soohwa suggests that they close the cafe early today since he doesn't feel like studying either. And, of course, we already know what he feels like doing instead. Anyway, as for the other person in the room, he couldn't really care less. One night, Yohan is preparing the bed when he notices the phone suddenly vibrate and saw that it already has 21 unread messages. Soohwa just finished his bath then, so Yohan handed him his phone. After Soohwa checks it out, he explains to Yohan that it was just Ha-young and Hae-young sending him a bunch of photos that they took with him. Yohan asks if he can look through them, and Soohwa lets him, which were mostly stolen shots. Yohan still found them all cute, though. That is until he saw this one particular photo which Soohwa explains was taken last month. It seems that right after their finals, they took their senior pictures, thus the photo of Soohwa in a suit. Apparently, it was a service organized by the school that wasn't compulsory, although Soohwa's friends convinced him to do it, and so he did even though the whole package was pretty expensive. Yohan becomes silent for a moment before he tells Soohwa how he looks good in a suit. Suddenly, Soohwa grabs Yohan's wrist, making him drop the phone. Yohan was so surprised that he immediately asks Soohwa why he did it, but Soohwa didn't really have any proper answer to give. But really, it was just because Soohwa saw Yohan look upset just then. As Soohwa tries to get on the bed to go to sleep, Yohan grabs him from behind and starts peppering kisses on his neck as he unbuttons Soohwa's PJ. Soon after, Soohwa's nip-naps are revealed, which Yohan now starts to pinch and make the younger man tremble. When Soohwa asks why Yohan is suddenly doing that, the older man plops him to the bed and says that seeing Soohwa in the suit made him want to do it. He then adds that he wants to take off a suit off Soohwa next time, although for now they'll just compromise with taking off Soohwa's PJs. Fully aware of what Yohan wants to do, Soohwa complains that he just took a shower, so Yohan promises to just help him wash up later, but Soohwa knows better than to believe him. Anyway, Yohan starts playing with Soohwa's nip-naps, and all complaints are now forgotten. Yohan then points out how easy it is for Soohwa to get into the mood when Yohan plays with his nip-naps. Then again, from what he observed, Soohwa is just easy to get into a mood, and since it seems to be true, Soohwa couldn't really say anything to refute it. Turns out Yohan isn't upset at all. He's just being a perv. The night went on, and the two did the mattress exercise. After a couple of rounds, Yohan asks Soohwa if they should wash up now. Soohwa gives his consent. As Yohan picks him up to head for the bathroom, Soohwa flinches since Yohan did so while still being inside him. Not that he's about to complain about it. Once inside the bathroom, Soohwa's legs gave out as soon as Yohan puts him down. Soohwa then went on to complain about how Yohan just doesn't know when to stop and asks him if he's secretly taking tonics or something. Soohwa's eyes widen in disbelief when he looks up to Yohan and sees his junior on full alert. Yohan didn't even say anything, but Soohwa was already telling him that he wouldn't do it. Then again, it's not like Soohwa can just ignore it either. And so Soohwa instead offers to give Yohan some service. It seems like Soohwa is also doing a good job at it because not long after, Yohan started moving on his own until he finally let out a facial cream on Soohwa's face. Soohwa is just complaining about how scared he was when Yohan suddenly started moving on his own, and that his throat now hurts. That was when Yohan pointed out how Soohwa also produced his own cream, much to the younger man's embarrassment. Soohwa tries to justify it at first, not that it really matters. Yohan then suddenly kisses him and asks Soohwa if he should just keep going, and promises to stop once Soohwa empties his storage. But see, 2 hours later, Yohan still didn't stop even though the two of them are now washed up and fully dressed with new PJs.